This is a video on the different applications of Generate, Refine, ControlNet, Live Mode, and regular Krita tools during your creative process, including a couple of examples of their applications and combinations. So to start, everyone's art processes and motivations are different. For me, it's simply about taking an idea out of your head and getting it out to a visible medium. In this case, onto a digital canvas. You can separate this idea into two elements: the conceptual factors and the visual factors, which just means the thing you want to make and how you want it to look. For example, an apple and how you want that apple to look. Now, even though these factors are intrinsically linked, they can have different amounts of importance. For example, your idea might just be an apple and the specifics of how it looks might not really matter, as long as it's an apple. Or you might already have a very specific apple spinning in your head that must absolutely be exactly how you already mentally visualize it. The conceptual factors might be more specific too. A red apple with a couple of yellow spots with a stem and a green leaf on top of a table and with a blue background. And thus the visualization must correspond closer to it. However, each of those individual details might also still not visually matter as much, as long as each detail is included in some way. Those yellow spots might be on the left or right side, that stem might be shorter or longer, that leaf might be smaller or bigger, that table might be any material and size, and that blue background might be any shade of blue. Or again, everything must be exactly how you already visualize it, down to the exact color values. The visual factors can also lessen the conceptual factors in a different way. Your mental image might vaguely or barely at all resemble an apple. It might just be vague lines, shapes, or blobs of colors. But the result must absolutely be exactly how you already see it and how you want it to look. Even if most people might not even recognize it's meant to be an apple. Both conceptual and visual factors can also provide feedback on each other and change as your creative process goes along. You might not have even cared about the color of the apple, but after seeing a red, a yellow, and a green apple, you might decide it must be a green apple now, and that the blue background must now be purple to contrast with it. You might also already have a realistic red apple in your head, but after spending a while painting it on the canvas, you might decide that you want it to be more stylized and look cartoonier instead. And thus the original concept can change. It should now be a cartoon apple character with big round eyes, noodle limbs, white gloves, thick line art, and so on. Decisions like these are what can partly help you decide whether to start from a generation, from refine, from a ControlNet result, or from using live mode. However, it's important to realize that all of these methods can be combined in different ways and can be used and interchanged at any time, and that you have full control at any point over any changes and decisions you want to make as you go along. And especially that sometimes using regular Krita tools can be much more effective than just doing random AI dice rolls. But also that AI can greatly enhance the use of those regular Krita tools. Now here are a couple of example reasons for starting your creative process using each of these methods: Generate, Refine, ControlNet, Live Mode, and regular Krita tools. And then a time-lapse showcasing each of them. The point of each time-lapse is, in a way, showing that method as the dominating one, but also to incorporate other methods combined with it. For example, the Generate time-lapse also incorporates the use of Refine and regular Krita tools. Part of the intention is also showing which methods can help enhance your creative process, especially saving time on the more mechanical aspects. Each method can save time in different ways, but it's something you sort of have to get a feeling for. Sometimes, a lot of times really, a simple generate button press won't really save you the time you might think it does. Compared to drawing vague lines and blobs and using Refine on them, or even better, using them with the Scribble ControlNet. But also sometimes, trying to sketch out something might be more time-consuming than simply generating it. Also, parts of the time-lapses are sped up, though mostly only the wait times between generations, or else this video would be even longer. Lastly, at least for this intro, you can also find all my settings and additional details in the link in the description. It's better and faster to explain them in text, also so the video isn't longer and can finally get to the point. Now, one of the reasons to start from a generation is to use it basically as a sketch and as a base image to work on. While not as fun as drawing a sketch, it can still serve the same function of depicting the conceptual and visual factors of your idea. Then it's just a matter of more mechanically refining those details. For me, I start my creative process with a generation, when I'm pretty sure the result on its own will meet most of the requirements from my initial idea. Especially using my own Laura, which matches my own style. Sometimes you might just want a simple anime one girl. You might also want more specific details and scenes, or even something more complex, abstract, or meaningful. Thus, as long as the result depicts your idea in some capacity, that's a good result to begin working on. Then you can begin making changes, as many or as little as needed to fully match your idea. Another reason for using a generation is definitely for stuff that you might find harder to make on your own. I've never been good at drawing cars, for example, so generating one is much easier. If you're good at cartoony anatomy but your realistic anatomy isn't as good, it can also serve as a good starting point. Both cases can even potentially serve as sort of art references, and you might even eventually properly learn from them and won't need to rely on generations. And of course, another reason to use generate is if you do want to more mindlessly play noise roulette and just fish for a result that looks cool and then work from that. Which is okay too. Thus, here's a time lapse starting off from a generation. So first, I generated a couple of results beforehand to avoid staring at progress bars. The idea for the example is simple, a pink cat girl lifting a big pencil. Most of these are okay, but I'm looking for a very specific pose. So out of all of these, only these two have the pose I want. The pose on the first is good, but the angle is different from what I want. I want a front view. So I picked the second result. Even though it has AI shenanigans and no big pencil, that's exactly what I'm going to fix now. So I just selected the ears from the top catgirl since they're already good. Then I cut and pasted them to move them on top of the bottom catgirl, also adjusting their size a bit. Then I removed the top catgirl. You can do this in various ways. I just used a selection and a fill. And just quickly manually touched it up with a brush. Now it's time to make the big pencil. You can do this in the same Krita document. I did it in a new one because it's easier to separate prompts and results. Here are the results. I'm looking for a very specific pencil. This one has the right thickness. And this one has the right eraser. Then I copy the pencil first and paste it on the main document. I also rotated it and adjusted it a bit. Then I also copy and paste the eraser from the other result, also adjusting it a bit to fit in with the pencil. Then I merge both layers to make the entire pencil easier to further adjust, mostly just resizing it a bit. Then I cut out the background, just selecting it and using Ctrl X. Sometimes you need to mash Ctrl X a couple of times to remove everything. But then I had a new idea. What if not only one pencil? What if three pencils? So I duplicated the pencil layer, flipped it horizontally and put it on top of the first pencil. Then I duplicated the first pencil and used it as the third pencil on top, also making sure the pencils were mostly aligned. Now I already had noticed she was missing her tail. I already had seen the exact tail I wanted, so I copy and pasted that from the result. Then I put it where I wanted it, adjusting its position and removing unnecessary pixels. And some very light brush tweaks. Then a quick image check and 2 refined passes at 40% strength to start integrating all these tweaks. Now some manual brush work to remove these weird lines. Also, since the pencils are on top of each other, they should cast a shadow, so I vaguely added it with the same brush. The pencils still need more work compared to the catgirl, so I selected the pencils, then did a refined pass on that selection. I disable both seamless and focus since I usually get better results that way. This is what's commonly known as in painting, though really it's just selecting something and doing refine. I liked the first result, so I applied that. Then I did a refined pass on the entire image at 36% to further integrate it and also merge it into a new layer. Then I resized the image to 1408 by 1408. I use this as a middle point resolution to start tweaking smaller details better, while larger details still also change enough. I also do a refined pass to increase overall pixel detail, basically upscaling the image in a way. I also did a second refined pass for good measure. Now normally I manually tweak and fix details that still stand out too much at this resolution. However, the overall image looked good enough as is, so I resized it to 2048 by 2048 to really start tweaking the smaller details. Also a refined pass after resizing to increase pixel detail again. This is what's known as high-res fix, though really it's just resizing the image and doing a refined pass. Then I started the more extensive manual fixes by manually drawing them with a brush. Even if some might seem minor, I still had to do them to properly finish my idea. First the hands, since I don't think fingers work like that. Then the eyelashes and the eyes. Again, they might seem minor, but to me they still stick out and must be fixed. Trust the vision source, dude, trust me. Then the regular human ears, since she already has catgirl ears. Notice how I missed a bit of the right ear before moving on to fixing the hair, its shadows and highlights. Yup, it do be like that a lot. Then parts of the line art that I want to be thicker and some very small details. Then the shoelaces, very important. Some further hair tweaks and hey, I finally noticed the other ear. Blush lines, also very important, and thicker lines for the hair so it stands out more. Then I switch to my style preset that's better for refining smaller details, to do a refine pass that should keep the overall image mostly as is, and only integrate all these smaller changes. And it worked as expected, just needed to refix a couple of details. Due to the nature of diffusion, the latent space and the VAE, very small details might always need a manual fix. The logo on the t-shirt, very important, and so are all these very small details. Now, even at this stage, you can still make relatively larger changes. For example, in this case I went, what if also grass? I already had a defined shape for the grass in my head, and so in this case doing a selection that followed that shape and then doing generate was enough to make the overall shape. Then it was just a matter of picking the one I liked the most. Then apply that result to a layer and copy and paste it to the main canvas and make the necessary size adjustments. Then I cut out the background. Sometimes with bad selection settings like mine, you might get leftover white outlines you'll have to manually erase. Then I reduce the grass layer's opacity to better erase the parts where she should be standing on. And she should also be casting a shadow on the grass so she doesn't look out of place, so very vaguely added shadows with a brush, including for the tail. Then I selected mostly just the grass and her feet to better integrate just these tweaks with a refined pass. I forgot to change the sampler, so I used the one for smaller changes. Hopefully it's noticeable just how relatively minor the integration is. So I switched to the style preset for bigger changes to actually better integrate the grass for real this time. And it worked as expected. Then I just tweaked some minor details on the grass, and thus the image was done since all the other details were already settled. Here's the final unflipped image. It fully matches the idea I wanted to make in its conceptual and visual factors. Of course, even at this stage of completion, you can still make whatever further tweaks you might deem necessary. In this case, this is good enough for me, especially for an example. Now moving on to refine. Starting from refine is good for when you want much more control, right from the beginning. Like generate, this can also mean you already have a clear idea. But in this case, it can also mean you're pretty sure no amount of generating will ever give you exactly that idea. And generate will be a time waste instead of a potential time saver. As mentioned in my previous videos, you can simply refine very basic lines and blobs of colors. Or you could also start from something more detailed, like a more proper sketch. You can even refine your old drawings. Refine in general, as its name perfectly encapsulates, will indeed let you refine practically any detail. Maybe think of it as a super healing brush, or an advanced autocomplete in any text editor just in visual form. Or a super ultra omni filter that can do multiple things really. Refine is the most useful of all image AI tools, the true bread and butter if you will. Either on its own or through in painting, which again is really mostly just selecting or masking stuff before doing refine. For example, let's start with this sketch. The idea this time is a pencil picking up the catgirl instead. The style is cartoonier this time because I like it more and it's what I'm slightly better at. I'm also using a different lore of mine. It produces outputs much closer to my cartoonier style. Your sketch can be as detailed or vague as you want. In this case, I basically sketched out the entire idea I had in my head because I like sketching. Sketching is fun. Once your sketch is as complete as you consider it, that is, to the point where you consider it depicts your idea well enough, you can start doing refined passes on it. I mistyped the name of my Laura. Good thing the plugin tells you when you do that. I also accidentally did 2 refined passes at 36% strength, but doing more also lets you pick and choose which one you like more. In this case, I picked the first one and then started typing the prompt. A good prompt still matters as it lets the right numbers/weights be used, so all the parts of your sketch, scribbles, and color blobs can get properly recognized according to what you really want them to be. No need for meme prompt engineering, just describing basic elements and characteristics is fine. What type of characters, their type of hair accessories, the thing they're holding, the type of background, and so on. The plugin also has a built-in autocomplete function that can help you type in certain words faster. Then with the prompt written, I did another 36% refined pass, and then a couple more at 56% to see how details would be further refined, comparing some of these results with the sketch. I liked this result the most, so I applied it and started manually drawing the details I wanted to add or fix. First, I added fingers to the pencil's hands. I also slightly fixed the catgirl's hair. Then a couple of smaller line fixes, and a quick refine pass to even it out. Then I started coloring all the parts that still needed coloring. You can do this in many ways. I simply used a multiply mode layer. Your colors don't really have to be very detailed or accurate. You can even color outside the lines and it's usually okay. The refine pass will still even them out well, but also the VAE will sadly very likely shift them away from the exact color values. Though you can always manually fix this at the end with various methods. Colors were good enough, so I did a quick flip test and then resized to 1408 by 1408, and a refine pass to start tweaking intermediate details. I made a new layer for these details, just as a general way to make it easier to undo them. Then just some decorative lines for the pencil. Then some tweaks on the eyes to make them closer to the original intention of the sketch. I also didn't notice they weren't blue as I wanted them, and as they were for the first catgirl in the generate example. But this also shows that anything not explicitly prompted won't change according to the prompt, especially for colors. Then some hand tweaks as she's meant to be holding a brush. And some minor tweaks on the shoes. Then a quick comparison back to previous layers, and especially the sketch layer, to make sure the expression is the one I really wanted originally. And thus another tweak to the eyes to make them closer to the intention. Then a very small tweak to the gloves, even though the hands could use a complete redraw. Don't worry, it's all according to keikaku. And some small tweaks to the hair, then a refined pass to integrate all these changes. Hopefully the idea of the draw refine method is being conveyed. And thus more manually drawn changes on the bottom. Draw refine, and some eye tweaks since he's meant to be a dude pencil. And anime models mysteriously, and for absolutely no reasonable reason at all, tend to shift everything into a one girl. Then some very minor tweaks to the socks and brush. All overall details looked okay at this point, so I resized it to 2048 by 2048 and did a refine pass to start tweaking the smaller details. Minor nose tweak, and I finally added a missing finger to the right hand, though they honestly should be properly redrawn and fixed. However, this also shows that you can change whatever you want, as much as you want. And that if you already have a good grasp at anatomy and any other art principles and skills, you can still have the sense of fulfillment of being able to do it on your own without diffusion assistance, and also without diffusion undoing your manual work. Then I did a 52% refine pass to see how bigger changes would look like. I didn't like the first results, so I tried a couple more, but I also didn't really like any of them, so I just ended doing a lower strength refine pass, and that one I did like. This in a way also shows you don't have to settle for a single AI dice roll, you always have multiple choices. And also what I said earlier about getting a feel of what can save you time and what will just be staring at progress bars but not really progressing much. Then some tweaks to the eyelashes, they have to always be perfect. Look man, you don't understand, it's my style. And more minor cat tweaks. At this point and at this resolution, most larger parts of the idea are already fulfilled, so the only things left to tweak and fix are minor details that most probably won't care about honestly. But I do. Boy do I do. And the most important fix for the pencil, truly the key to all of this. A quick flip check and some adjustments with the transform tool. This is to fix the perspective a bit so it doesn't look too lopsided. And the ear on the left looked too long now, so I adjusted it with the liquify tool and some light brushwork. Then just a refined pass to even it all out again. And after checking out the details for a bit, I decided it needed some shading. So I did some very vague shading on a separate layer set to overlay blending mode. Then I merged all layers into a new one, and then duplicated that merged layer. This is so I could use that duplicate layer as a ControlNet layer to keep most details locked in and only fix the shading. In this case, I used the line art ControlNet. I set it to the duplicated layer, set it to full strength, and then did a refined pass at 68%. I was using the softer style preset when I meant to use the one for bigger changes, so I switched back thinking I wouldn't like the result. But I did like it, even if the shading is a bit lighter than intended, so I kept it. Then I made a new layer to add a couple of highlights and also some shadows that I considered were still needed. And a refined pass to even them out, though I probably should have used the softer style preset as some of the highlights were undone. Hopefully it at least shows why it's good to have different style presets for different levels of changes and integrations. Then almost the final pass of manual tweaks. It's honestly better to do some of these at the very end, as again the nature of the VAE will just potentially keep undoing whatever you might already have fixed. especially if you're like me and notice you have bigger changes to do right at the very end, though you can also mitigate some of this by containing your changes in a way with selections. But I just like YOLOing everything with full image refine passes. Just like this final refine pass, then the very last of the last final tweaks. And at least for the purposes of this example, this result is finally done. Like the generate example, it fulfills all the conceptual factors, and in this case almost all of the visual factors, leaving some room for the visualization to still be further improved later on. But it's still more than good enough for me. Here's the final image on its own. Again, I hope the idea of draw refine is conveyed. Honestly, most of this example was manual drawing with a couple of refined passes here and there. Next is ControlNet. As its name implies, it provides much more control over the diffusion process, instead of only relying on math and noise. It does this with basically a stencil that looks the noise into its much more specific shape. It provides similar guidance to refine, but can be more precise and also faster. For example, I really like using the Scribble ControlNet, because I can have my sketch be completed and colored, sometimes practically exactly how I wanted it to be completed, without the need to do as many refined passes on it to get it to the same level of completion. ControlNet can also lock in the details that are already settled, so refined passes don't radically alter your entire image and only change what you want. So let's start again with a sketch. The idea this time is a robot catgirl holding a pencil. Once again, I sketched out the entire basic idea. Initially, I was just going to do a catgirl lifting a pencil for all examples, to show how you can do the same idea with different methods, but it was going to be too boring. I'm also using a different style preset I call raw, because it doesn't have any quality-related positive or negative prompts. And I'm also using my same Laura from the previous example, that's closer to my raw style. This is to ensure maximum. Memes aside, the intention really is showing you can make your results look how you want, and especially look pretty much exactly as your regular human style. You can entirely avoid generic AI slop styles in favor of more unique styles, though you can also do more generic AI styles if that's your intention. Just like the last example, once the sketch was at the level of completion I wanted, it was time to type the prompt. In general, I would say the prompt specifying every detail you want is even more important with ControlNet, especially to ensure the colors you want are filled in. Though sadly you can't type exact color values, you can still make sure pink hair is some type of pink, blue eyes are some type of blue, and so on. And so I generated a bunch of results, using the Scribble ControlNet set to that sketch layer. I generated results at each of the 5 ControlNet strength values. The furthest left value provides the least amount of guidance from the ControlNet layer, letting the model be more creative, while the furthest right result sticks as much as possible to that layer. Normally I stick closer to the middle values, but this way you can see multiple examples. This is one of the things you get a feel for just by using it. It also depends really on how sketchy your sketch is, and how much it already is at a more elaborate level. Or even if your line art is already properly finished, and you only want it to be colored. And so out of all the results, I liked these 2 ones the most, because they were the closest to the original idea. And I ended up picking this specific one because it unironically had the most soul. Which just means I liked it the most. Then I renamed the results layer to better identify it and put it again through ControlNet to further improve it. I generated a bunch of results to see their different variations and have multiple options. While still staying pretty close to the intended idea, the concept is already locked in, and so is the overall visualization. Mostly just need to tweak more specific details. I like these 2 the most, but specifically I like the head of this second result more. So I selected that head, inverted the selection, and cut out the rest of the layer, leaving only the head in its own layer. Maybe think of it as inverted in Paint. I also removed the differently colored background. There are more efficient ways, but I just used a brush. Some small early tweaks that stuck out. Then I removed the ControlNet and did a regular refine pass. It's important to remember you aren't locked into using a ControlNet once you've added one, and that you can remove or add back any of them at any time. I also slightly centered and adjusted the image, before resizing it to 1408 by 1408 and doing another refine pass. Again, this is to start tweaking medium-level details. First the head, since she's meant to be a robot with a square or rather rectangular head. And also the eyelashes, very important. It's my very original style element, donut steel. And a slight tweak to the nose that you'll likely see again because that's just how it do. Then some tweaks to the bottom part of the image, like the hands and part of the shorts. You might also have noticed by now that the thing I intended to be a pencil turned into a sort of mechanical pen. That's just one of the happy little accidents that you can still have with Diffusion. In this case, I actually liked it, and thus I decided to keep it, because it fit the overall robotic intention. Then I tweaked the legs. I was thinking whether to keep the robot legs as a happy little accident too, or stick to the original intention of jet legs. I ended up sticking with the original intention because I liked it more. Then I fixed the perspective a bit because I tend to lopside stuff, and did a refined pass after to integrate all these manual changes, but also to reduce or even eliminate some of the blurriness from using transform tools. Then a refined pass at higher strength to see if stuff would change more. I liked all the changes except for the expression, which shifted a bit from the original intention. So I just erased that part of the face, and since the previous layer with the expression I wanted was already there, it was easier this way. Some further tweaks to the hair. It's now meant to be like the front is painted on, or even better, it's a monitor display. Also somewhere along the way she gained additional eyelashes, so I evened out both sides. I was about to resize the image when I noticed parts of the background had uneven colors. Depending on the samplers, models, and just the nature of diffusion, not to mention in painting if used, sometimes a type of glow might appear, in the form of slight color variation around a character or object. So I just selected the background and filled it in with an even color. Then the final resizing to 2048 and 2 refined passes at different strength for good measure, mostly to further integrate the changes in the background color. Then I switched to my softer style preset, also in its raw version with no quality-related prompts, to start manually fixing smaller details. Same as every example of manual fixes, it might be hard to convey that I really want to and need to make these changes, but I really do. I'm not just memeing. Well, maybe only a bit. Don't worry, there will be more proper ControlNet use in a bit, right after this refined pass to integrate the changes as always. Then I looked at the image and thought, what if city background too? So I selected just the solid color background for a reason I'll explain in a bit and started sketching out a simple city in a new layer. Then I modified the prompt to include the changes to the background and to account for the new elements, the buildings, the clouds, the sun, a blue sky, and so on. The intention for this prompt change and also the selection was to use ControlNet right there to complete the city sketch. That didn't work out too well, though the prompt change was still a good idea, since it'll still be useful later on. And so even though I queued up a bunch of ControlNet results, it was just better to copy the city sketch to a new document and redo the ControlNet generations there. I generated a bunch of results again at different ControlNet strengths just to have more options, though right away I liked the first result. I also liked this other result, so I copied that first to the original document just to see which one fit better. And then repurposed the original selection as a sort of mask. I just made a new layer and filled it with a solid white color to then reselect it with Control-click on that layer. This made it easier to cut out the background, so the robot catgirl was perfectly on top of it. I sort of liked the result here, but I also wanted to try with the first result I liked. I liked this one more because the colors and details of the background were less busy and let the robot catgirl stand out more, so I kept this one instead. And so I did 2 refined passes back to back to better integrate her with the background. The second refined pass also improved the background, though it also introduced one happy little accident. I decided to keep it because it was kind of funny, so I just manually tweaked it a bit. Sometimes, even if not in the original intention, stuff like this might improve or complement your original idea. This can happen even traditionally, as a certain painter famously coined the phrase. And more manual tweaks to all these details. You could argue that you could do these with just a selection and refine. Thing is, I still honestly really do like drawing, so it's just more satisfying to do this manually. Again, even if they look like quote-unquote low-effort stuff, it's still fun moving a stylus around and fully completing what I wanted to make. So the actual effort, or rather the true desire to see something made well, is still taking place. I just don't get equating only physical effort to this desire, especially with digital art, which is already much less physical effort. I wasn't sure about this part and if it should be flesh-colored, but then I looked at the other hand and it made sense you would have a metal joint there, so I left it as is. Some of the last changes, since the entire image is looking almost done by now. One good look for good measure to really notice anything that I might have missed. Which happens a lot, to be honest, TBH. Just like these details that I hadn't noticed until then. And that's it, the image is finished. Here's the image on its own. Just like all examples, you can further tweak it, or even fully redo anything however you want. In this case, I hope it also shows you can stick as closely to any style as you want, especially yours. And even keep whatever jank details. I mean, details you enjoy about your own style or any style really. Next is live mode. Live mode is basically an automated form of refine, so the same principles apply. It simply uses less steps, and sampler is optimized for less steps to provide faster auto previews. These previews provide faster feedback over what you are manually drawing and how it's being refined. Thus, it can sort of feel like you're drawing alongside image AI, and you can also adjust your drawing based on that feedback. And then apply the results to an existing layer or a new layer, and keep working from that until you're satisfied with the results. So let's start by using live mode. The idea this time is just a girl cat holding a pencil in the form of a silly meme. Live mode is all about faster feedback from whatever you're doing in the canvas. In general, I like to use it for what you could call vibe drawing. So most of this example will be drawing, and using live mode as assistance for that drawing. Similar to refine, you can choose when to apply the results. The button next to the play and stop button applies the result to the same layer you're working on, and the button on the right to that applies the result to a new layer. I like applying to a new layer since it provides backups of previous steps. Same as refine, you can do multiple refine passes back to back, which in this case means you can spam the apply to layer button, up to the point you consider your current image progress improves further to your liking. You can also increase the strength slider to more radically change your results. You can do this without a prompt, but again, a detailed prompt still helps everything get recognized properly, especially the intention. So here I'm typing the prompt, just basic elements according to the idea. You can see the result already starting to change according to the prompt and become slightly closer to the intention. For example, the intended colors are slowly starting to appear. Here I'm just sketching out the hand better, which in turn also provides better guidance for the diffusion process, especially the coloring. Again, throughout this process, you can see the automatic previews on the bottom right. I'm using these to also guide my manual drawing on the left. Once I see a good result, I apply it to the canvas. Then some more tweaks before also applying the next result. Truly, this is the purest essence of draw refine. You can go back to previous layers at any point. Note that the preview will also change depending on the active layers. Here I'm just vaguely coloring the pencil. You can apply in-between results at any time. Here I just wanted to color everything manually before applying any result. If the preview result isn't to your liking, you can try randomizing the current seed. See my video about how diffusion works to learn what a seed is. Wink wink. You can also adjust the strength slider at any point. Then back to more manually drawn tweaks after applying the result. By the way, I'm using the same style preset in LoRa from the first generate time-lapse. I forgot to mention it at the start, so it's easier to just casually insert that here instead of shifting the already edited parts of the video. Please understand. Here I'm redrawing her eyes to make her look more directly at the viewer. Remember when I said I would just mostly speed up progress bars? You really think someone would do that? Just go on the internet and tell lies. And more small fixes before applying the next result. Here, past me went, wait, shouldn't her other paw be visible too? So I drew it too. And now current me is going, wait, doesn't that defeat the purpose of the meme? The answer is yes, but just imagine she's doing it with her back paw instead. Isn't imagination great? A quick check before making a new overlay blending mode layer to start coloring in her fur. Like all previous examples, she's meant to be a pink girl cat. Also meant to have blue eyes, which I didn't forget this time. Then I applied the results twice because I liked each of the results I saw in the preview. They integrated the vague coloring as intended. Very small tweaks on the pencil. The overall image looked to be at a decent level of completion according to the idea, so just one more applied result before resizing it to 1408. And another applied result after resizing to increase pixel detail up to that of the increased resolution. Same principles as regular refine and the past examples. Obligatory eyelashes tweaks. Mug style. Some minor tweaks on the pencil. These medium-level details look good enough, so it was time to resize to 2048, doing all the necessary refine passes in between. Here I tried applying the results again, but the processing wasn't done yet. You can tell when this happens because the size and resolution of the result will be smaller. This is understandable because larger resolutions take longer to process. Though there's no way to tell when a live mode result is fully processed inside Krita, aside from seeing the preview update. However, if you're using a standalone Comfy UI server for the plugin, you can at least look at the terminal. This should let you see the progress bars to see when a live mode result is done. If you have a second monitor, you could move the terminal there. Note that doing practically anything on the canvas will queue up another result, since that is the intention of live mode. Minor eyelash tweaks. I also like this happy little accident bump on her mouth, so I decided to turn it into a fang. A quick overview of the image looking for details that still needed fixing. Like the fur on the ear on the right. This particular detail was a bit stubborn, so I decided to switch out of live mode to regular refine instead. Remember, you can switch between any tool at any time. This will also switch you to your normal sampler preset, which should usually also provide better pixel quality. But before doing a refine pass, more eye tweaks, especially using an overlay layer to make her eyes blue again. Hopefully this serves as an example of why doing color tweaks is better saved for the later parts of your process. Again, this is due to the unavoidable color shifting done by the VAE. Color consistency, truly the final boss of image AI. One final image check before doing a refined pass with the softer style preset to integrate all these changes without radically changing the image. And thus, another result is completed exactly keikaku as planned. Here's the full image. I fixed the meme paw off screen. Hopefully this also shows that even what you might consider finished can still be fixed and changed at any time. You aren't just at the mercy of diffusion dice rolls or even your own dumb brain. You truly have full control at any time. But it also shows why it's still important to be aware of the details at all times, and why art and image editing principles are still good to know too, so you can know when and how to fix anything needed. And lastly, there's the use of regular Krita tools, which hopefully has already been shown throughout all these examples. Sometimes it's just better to use a selection tool and rotate, scale, and resize whatever you need. Most of the time, it's also better to manually draw the things you want, and also manually make any necessary fixes. Even a regular Krita filter might be a good choice, instead of only relying on the diffusion noise roulette. Thus why I always say that learning proper art and image editing principles is still very worthwhile, and something that I still recommend. Of course, it goes without saying that you can do everything traditionally, without any diffusion assistance. Or as shown in this past video, you can pick and choose which specific parts of your process to enhance with image AI. You might only want to use diffusion assistance for the line art, the coloring, or the shading, for example. Again, you have full control at any time. Hopefully, this video has been useful in some way, and conveys that even with diffusion assistance, the idea and all its factors are still being expressed. Because an art process, at least for me, is still in service of that idea, regardless of the tools being used. I also hope it shows that there's still an effort taking place. Or rather, the desire to make something good and do it well is still being conveyed. Thanks for watching.